magnificent men in their flying machine. They go up to the top, they go down to the down. They encounter all the ladies and steal all the steam with their up to the top and their down to the down. Up, down, flying around, looping the loop and defying the ground. They're all frightfully keen, those magnificent men in their flying machine. Down with their feet in the air. They don't think of danger, they really don't care. Newton will think he has made a mistake to see those young men.
All right.
We just flew from one farmer's field to another. We were at home. We had our own field on our hay fields right at home. We'd come in and land and run up and down the field right at our own home. Most people out in the backwoods. There was no Department of Commerce at that time, or FAA or CAA as the early ones were. So you just went out and fly, and if you felt that it was feasible to fly that day, you flew. If it was too windy, you have your own judgment whether you went flying or not. And it's gusty, you didn't want to wreck your airplane because you had a lot of time spent in fixing it up and keeping it going.
What you're seeing here today are some of the efforts that was put on by the local group of people in Waukesha that got together and formed the Waukesha Aviation Club to finally develop an airport whereby they could fly their home-built airplanes and their gliders and so forth. They usually meted once a month and had speakers from out through the country to come to talk to them how to promote aviation and form an aviation club. The club at the present time did get the county board to establish an airport.
Well,
we did everything that was daring. In other words, that we went by the hard way.
Flying squirrels in the woods, and we see them how they stretch out and fly. We even put gunny bags on, so jumped off the haymows in the mayhaws to see if we could fly like he could fly.
We heard flying was going to be the coming thing, and we wanted to be part of it. This was it. And we didn't want farming. We mechanical. We wanted motorcycles. We had motorcycles.
Exciting sports, you know.
The early air shows in 1930, we had put on, we only charged $1 a seat to come in to see the show. And we had quite a few of them there doing acrobatics and things like that. There's a lot of people come out to watch it.
They're watching right now, watching Bob Huggins do smoke riding, and that was one of his occupations at that time. This is the PA announcer telling all about. This is a horse race start of OX5 race. In those days, you could start all in a bunch, and who got up there first and who got back on the ground and was the winner.
Now we had the pants race. The idea was to get a number of planes with a pilot and the passenger in each one, and then they'd take off and go around and land, and then the passenger had to take his trousers off and see who could get back on and get the pants on quick. This fella here, somebody tied him in a knot, so he had to take and untie him to get back in the airplane. I don't think he won the race because he had to spend too much time taking his pants off.
This is one of the parts of the air show that was put on. It was a kind of comedy act. That's Dean in a Waco 10 who was going to go up and bomb this Model T, which is not supposed to be out on the field. Now he is practicing up here to pick up the handkerchief. That's the first miss, but here's the second round. This time it don't look that easy, but there he is. He picked up the handkerchief. That was Dean in the Waco.
Dean is one of the finest pilots that I think I've ever met in my life. And the proof of it is that he had an engine actually fall out of an airplane, and he got the airplane down intact with the student in it. That takes some real skill. A propeller had lost a blade, and the unbalanced condition was such that it just tore the engine right out of the motor mount. And with the engine gone, naturally the center of gravity shifts way to the rear of the aircraft. And the student wanted to bail out, but Dean says, no, you stay in there. We're going to need all the weight we can get. So by careful manipulation and timing, Dean managed to get the airplane down intact, and the engine landed, of all places, the engine landed in a cemetery. And Dean landed in a field just adjacent to the cemetery.
This is a plane Earl O'Meara used to have in Waukesha on the Saudi Wiskowitz. They just flying around and had the misfortune the engine quit and landed in the orchard and kind of ruined the airplane at that time. That's a number of years ago. Nobody was hurt in this one, a small airplane. That's something what happens at the airport in the wintertime, kind of spoils the flying. This was a meet we had to carry passengers to promote aviation. That's Russell Wilson there and Jack Lehman, and that's Russell Schucci flying the Swallow. And this happens to be an airplane that caught fire in the air. Could do a malfunction of a carburetor, caught fire in the air, and it was ended up as a fatal accident at the time.
Here we should take and put it on the Waco and try it out someday.
Yeah. Well, while we wait, I'll put this over there.
Good.
Now, let's take this out and see if it's good as it's supposed to be.
Yeah, I think it should be well done. I don't know how well it's working.
We'll put it in the vise there, and that's so we can hold it and turn it, see how it operates. This is
We had trouble, yeah. This wouldn't start when I brought it home from Hammondsport.
that's the magneto.
You don't look like there's anything wrong with
That
that.
looks right there.
Right? Oh, it looks like it's in good shape.
And then when we put it on the pusher, another one, if we contemplate building another one,
the fabric is sewed to the wings. Each rib has to be sewed. And it takes quite a technique to sew that all on there. Then it
Why don't you just clean the outside edge up like that's all it needed, not that deep when you move it.
This is up at Al's Kels's. Channel 6 came out one day and wanted to get a flight with my daughter on the wing, but here's the dean there giving a Cusher a flight check. This is a normal procedure on an OX5 is to drain all of the sediment bowls, which is on the carburetor, to get all the dirt and water out of it so they don't have any failure. This is where we put gasoline into the tank up there, and we're using a chamois skin here. Water will not go through a chamois, so it makes a good preventive thing from getting water in the carburetor. This is the overhead, what we call the overhead on the OX5, and each part of those has to be oiled up each probably a couple hours of flying. That's the control wheel which controls that's the aileron that Dean there is showing the function of it. Now we're putting on the coal bucket and binders, what they say in those days, and making a flight. You have to have something to keep the noise out of your ears. The propeller is started by giving us, it has a self-starter. You do the starter yourself. You head it down the runway and most generally directly into the wind. The airplane takes off in about 150 feet. If the wind's blowing a little harder, that shortens up the takeoff. The airplane climbs at about 400, 500 feet a minute, and it's capable of carrying additional passengers. In those days, you got $25 just to make a flight.
Well, Dale says in calm air that it'll fly hands off. But most of the time when Dale flew it for air shows was not during calm air periods. This was in violation as to what Curtis had actually recommended for flying. He says, Curtis says that the aircraft should not be flown in the times when the air is turbulent. He said that he flew his airplanes only during the early morning periods when the mosquitoes were out, and in the evening when the mosquitoes were out again.
When you first go up there to fly with someone, that airplane is absolutely separate from you. But as you fly, and pretty soon the wings become part of you. The airplane becomes part of you. You're like a bird. You've come to the feeling of sense. You do everything subconsciously. You make banks, you speed, turn. It's just like a bird. And so in other words, I say the airplane becomes part of you. And when you go up there first, it's just a piece of machinery, mechanical. It's separate from you. And you can tell that yourself when you fly. You subconsciously fly the airplane. You just look the way you're going. You see there's nobody around there. You make turns, you make this. It's all done subconsciously.
80 degrees. You'll watch gate 37 reaching that flight out. Position over.
Dive down, get up that speed. Watch down, they do the pitch up the snap on it. We'll reintroduce them once again. Up we go, from forward Texas. Mr. Charlie Heller.
The OX5 is stated on here. It's a 90 horsepower engine. It's really what made general aviation as far as that goes. It's surplus, many surplus engines from World War I, and people could buy them from around $50 to $150, all Cosmoline, because the government had no more use for them. The war was over. They were primarily used in the Curtis Jenny. There was a trainer and some other units. So when all this stuff was excess baggage, as the government called it, people started buying them for making an airplane. It was an 8-cylinder engine. As you can see, it's a V. It was made by Glenn Curtis. I mean, it's the 5th model, the OX5. This was supposed to be a Plus years ago, but somewhere along in history it got changed over. You can see the action going here now. And of course, those are really flipping. The prettiest sight you ever saw if you're sitting back of an OX5 powered engine and see all the 8 rocker arms just to be playing a regular dance up there. It was really wonderful. It's kind of a dying man's club, if you could use that term, because, I mean, they're not taking on new members. This comes up quite a few times at our convention. Oh, let our sons and daughters and stuff like that belong as auxiliary members. Well, that wasn't the purpose of the club, is to promote early aviation and recognize people that were in early aviation.
What you are looking at here today is the EAA Museum here at Oshkosh. Early establishment of the EAA was at Hales Corners, and it was established by one of the well-known flyers, was Paul Poberezny. He had an ambition to have aircraft on display of all types of aircraft which were built in those days. This is the original Sweetheart that I used to own and donated to the to the EAA Museum back in 1969. That's Steve Whitman and myself walking through the museum. As you can see, a magnificent display of aircraft. It's an outstanding museum. It's worldwide. It is even out polishes the Smithsonian. The museum is open. You can go through that during the weeks, and even on Sundays on certain times. These are one of the racing planes that were used back in the 30s. There's an awful amount of different aircraft that you could expect to see here. This is one of the sports aircraft which was designed and built by Paul Poberezny. The home built is what made aviation as it is today.
What you see here has come from a dream. Our work is to ensure that this last frontier, this vast ocean of air above us, is maintained with reasonable freedom and safety and shared equally, and not by those who use it just for profit.
did reinvent the airplane. A certain phase of flying we invented. Aviation started from the Wright brothers and progressed very rapidly into high-speed airplanes. Every plane that was built from the Wright brothers on was heavier, bigger, and flew faster. And they forgot about slow-speed flight very quickly. And nothing could fly slowly. All of the old-time airplanes were big and heavy, and they came in quite fast. They came in at close to 50 miles an hour, the older biplanes. And really, I had to learn how to make an airplane controllable at low speed. This was never learned before. Well, the seat of the pants is a term that's used to describe flying without instruments or any kind of a black box. They literally did kind of fly by the seat of their pants. But we do that too with the ultralights. You do it by visual reference. And so it really is pretty to fly just 50 feet off the ground and just clear the trees, just about brush the treetops. It's just as if you had wings.
Well, about 5-6 years ago, I had a Cherokee 6 equipped with everything you could put on it, 3-axis autopilot and radios and all the equipment, and it got to where flying wasn't fun anymore, and I just decided to heck with it. I sold it, and about 4 years ago I heard about these ultralights, and I came to Oshkosh and researched them thoroughly and ended up buying a Teratorn TA. That was a 3-axis ultralight, and I've had a lot of fun with that. And last year I came to Oshkosh and bought a later model of the Tierra 2, and so I can have more fun flying that Tierra 2 and don't worry too much about regulations. I tend to my business and stay around my farm, and that's all I'm interested in now.
Well, it's kind of funny that one day he goes to work and he's flying a 727 and doing all this kind of stuff, gets home, takes off his uniform, and gets into something like this and flies it.
That's what's so fun about this. You don't have to talk to anybody.
And that's where the 50 years comes in. The whole span, that you can still have this.
And you get in here and you sit here and you just start looking out through all these flying wires.
It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen.
You swear you're 50 years ago.
Taking a ride in a Waco biplane, those things were used during to go out barnstorming with. Everybody wanted to ride it. It's like riding a convertible. It's nothing like being free in the air and doing loops. Passengers just would get in line and go right back in again when we were barnstorming out around the country. They just something about flying in an open airplane.
Well, a loop is a simple maneuver if you really, after you do it a few times, and don't worry about get the thing over with, because in a loop, they had those days was what they call a ball bank, and it was a half moon that had the ball in the center, and that indication would tell you right away whether you're skidding or slipping. And that's how we learned a lot to fly. We would, ourselves, we had that in the Jenny, and when we're making turns, we'd kind of check ourselves to see how we were doing. We found that people that were raised on a farm or run a tractor or run a bicycle or stuff like that was easier to teach to fly because he was able to coordinate hands and feet doing things on the farm where you cultivate and you use your feet to steer the cultivator. Motorcycles also was easier to fly because he had a sense of balance, bicycles and so forth. But the doctors and lawyers, they were the toughest ones to fly because they always went more or less by the book. They didn't fly them, could get them to fly by the seat of their pants. It had to be this and it had to be that and so forth.